A strange call at noon. The clock struck exactly 12:56 p.m. on October 16, 2022, when the humdrum atmosphere of the 911 Emergency Dispatch Center in Willowbrook, Washington, was abruptly shattered by an ambiguous call that would soon send ripples throughout the department. The line opened to a swirl of indistinct noises, muffled grunts, stifled cries, punctuated by odd raspy gasps that seemed both desperate and strangled. There was no discernible speech but rather a tortured symphony of sounds that suggested distress. 911, what is your emergency? Asked dispatcher Erica Foster, her tone crisp but soothing. Standard procedure dictated concise questions, but Erica's voice was laced with an almost instinctive sense of urgency. She had fielded hundreds of calls over 10 years of service, but something about this one made her nerves prickle. The caller did not respond in words. Instead, there were repeated, barely audible "mmph" and noises, wavering in pitch as though the person was attempting to cry out with a covered mouth. Erica pressed her headset tighter, straining to pick up any background clues. Behind the muffled moans, she detected the faint shuffle, a series of taps, perhaps knuckles or heels hitting a hard floor, and every so often, a scraping metallic sound that didn't seem to fit the environment of a normal household. If you're in danger and can't speak, try to tap the phone or make a noise, she encouraged softly, switching to crisis mode logic that sought any sign of communication. Her mind worked rapidly through every possible scenario, a medical emergency, an intruder, or even a child playing with the phone, but the unique timbre of fear in the suppressed noises, their irregular intensity, and especially the lack of coherent speech, made her suspect something far more sinister. The caller seemed physically restrained or incapacitated. Leaning forward, Erica watched as the call data appeared on her dispatch monitor, her heart thudding as she activated protocols for suspected attack, including silent tracing. "I'm sending help. Please try to stay on the line," Erica said, her voice warm and clear, while quickly alerting the technical team to run a rapid triangulation on the phone signal. She reported to the nearest available officers and flagged the call as a potential silent domestic assault, emphasizing the possibility of the victim being female, gagged, and restrained. She was careful not to give cause for panic in the communication log, but her fingers moved quickly with practiced confidence. Moments stretched as the indistinguishable, tormented noises continued. Erica could feel the tension mounting. Every moment counted. With no address explicitly stated, location tracking was critical. Each second offered clues, every faint noise another window into an unseen, urgent battle. Through sheer intuition and experience, Erica's professional detachment gave way to empathy. She kept her line of support open, repeating reassurances, her voice becoming the only lifeline for someone on the other end whose world had suddenly spiraled into terror. As the call progressed, the background sounds fluctuated, now a brief heavy thud, then silence, then another ragged gasp. The noises faded gradually until, ominously, there was only a hush, static, the call still live, but no evidence the victim could reply or even remain conscious. That eerie absence of sound haunted Erica. She kept the channel open for as long as possible while relaying critical updates to police units, convinced every detail in those first tense minutes would make the difference between life and tragedy. Decisiveness of the dispatcher. The clock in the 911 Emergency Response Center blinked 12:56 p.m. as dispatcher Emily Harper listened intently, headset pressed to her ear. The room was awash in the usual cacophony of ringing phones and hurried voices, but Emily's attention was locked onto a single, chilling call, a line haunted by muffled, wordless utterances. Despite the lack of clarity, every subtle shift in background sound seemed amplified by her mounting adrenaline. Emily's training kicked in. Rather than succumb to confusion or hesitate, she immediately initiated the center's silent emergency protocol. She softly encouraged the caller, "If you can't speak, tap the phone or make any noise you can." Her voice was calm but her mind raced, parsing every irregular gasp and shuffling noise for possible clues. Was someone hurt, threatened, or suffocating? She tuned in to faint, rapid thumps, and what sounded like distant metallic scraping. Her instincts screamed danger. Likely the caller's mouth was obstructed, perhaps by force. Emily did not disregard the weaknesses in the audio. Instead, she used them as critical evidence, typing her observations into the dispatch system with remarkable focus and clarity. Every piece of information mattered, even uncertainty. Emily requested an immediate technical trace of the call's origin, flagging it as a potential life-threatening domestic incident. With methodical urgency, she routed a silent alarm to the local police, ensuring first responders were already in motion as she stayed on the line. Emily's fingers moved swiftly across her keyboard, relaying live updates: ambient struggle, possible restraints, caller might be female, location triangulation in progress. She synthesized each ambiguous cue into actionable intelligence. Emily's determination never wavered, even as the caller's noises grew more desperate and then faded into unsettling silence. Some dispatchers might have interpreted muteness or incoherence as a prank, but for Emily, every second without a response was proof of peril. Without any direct voice contact, she sustained communication, alternating between quiet reassurance and precise logistical reporting. She remained the unseen lifeline for someone whose world had suddenly narrowed to choked breaths and muffled pleas. When technical staff messaged back the emerging cell tower triangulation, Emily cross-referenced the results with nearby known residences. She preemptively contacted officers to update their approach protocols, cautioning about a potentially barricaded suspect and suggesting avenues of entry unlikely to alert the perpetrator. She considered every possibility: medical crisis, domestic assault, abduction, even accidental dial, but always prepared for the worst. Through it all, Emily's decisiveness stood out not just in her actions, but in her ability to hold hope for the victim. She encouraged the silent survivor to hang on, maintaining an open channel and whispering, "Help is coming, you're not alone." The air in the control center grew thick with tension, yet Emily remained poised, her judgment guiding the entire operation. Her quick thinking and unwavering resolve translated ambiguous despair through that connection into urgent, coordinated action, turning minutes of horror into the first steps toward a rescue. The terrifying silence. The horrifying silence that descended after the cryptic 911 call was not merely the absence of noise, it was a profound void that expanded across every second, tightening its grip on both the victim and the dispatcher. In the muted aftermath, Erica Foster clung to her headset, her breath shallow as she scanned for any flicker of hope. The hum and crackle of the open line felt heavier now, amplifying the desperate reality that something unspeakable was unfolding just out of reach. On the dispatcher's end, a blend of anxiety and responsibility set in. Every second of stillness was a question. Was the caller unconscious? Was help too late? Had the perpetrator noticed the call and acted to silence the victim further? Erica replayed the previous seconds in her mind, those muffled cries, odd rasps, and the frenzied tap-tap that now fell away into oblivion. She found herself speaking softly, more for her own reassurance than that of the distant, voiceless caller. "If you can hear me, hold on, help's on the way." Her consoling whisper simply hung in the air, unanswered. In that chilling pause, the technological limitations of remote rescue became painfully clear. The dispatcher's screen blinked with coordinates, but without the caller's voice or active signals, there was only so much the system, or Erica, could do. Adrenaline surged as she quickly relayed updates to the responding officers. "No contact, possible unconsciousness, silence persists." Meanwhile, in the quiet of the Sanders household, every tick of the wall clock was deafening. The absence of struggle of any human sound made the violence of the moments before feel both distant and hauntingly imminent. The result was a kind of paralysis for both the rescuer and the victim, a shared suspense bridged by dead air. Neighbors walked by blissfully unaware, while inside that house and on the other end of a call, lives balanced precariously on nothing but hope and radio signals. This dreadful silence transformed the atmosphere from tense to harrowing. For Erica, it was the worst kind of uncertainty, a period with no closure, where protocol fought against the instinct to do more, to say more, to somehow reach beyond the divide. Dispatchers are trained for chaos, for noise and panic. It is the void that breaks them, that pushes their professionalism to its emotional edge. That afternoon, with the static whispering in her ears, Erica waited. She would wait until that line finally broke, or until help arrived to shatter the hush with answers, whatever those might be. The peaceful city of Evergreen, Washington, bathed in the gentle midday light, was the sort of American town that could lull anyone into a sense of security. Nestled on the western edge of the state, this suburban gem sprawled across gentle coastal plains, fringed by ancient conifer forests and with a pleasant whiff of salt in the breeze from the distant Pacific. Neatly trimmed lawns flanked single-story houses painted in soft blues and warm grays, each accented by hanging flower baskets and the odd American flag fluttering on a porch. For most of its nearly 30,000 residents, life was defined by routine and the rhythm of the seasons: sleepy spring mornings, bustling summer barbecues, golden autumn leaves, and the hush of winters spent inside by gas fireplaces. The town's design reflected its priorities. Wide avenues and tree-lined streets facilitated easy movement while keeping pedestrian life at the heart of the community. Federal highways skirted the town's edge, connecting Evergreen to larger urban centers, but few locals felt the need to leave often. Commerce thrived in family-owned diners, hardware stores passed down for 3 generations, and a local high school where Friday night football games drew out whole neighborhoods. There was little crime, just minor disputes, lost pets, noise complaints, the occasional mailbox prank or small-town scandal. Law enforcement officers were respected and familiar figures, greeting community members by name as they patrolled neighborhoods or dropped by the old coffee shop off Alder Avenue. Faith and family formed the connective tissue of Evergreen. Sundays one could see congregations streaming into white-steepled churches, stops at the farmer's market for locally harvested apples, and children darting through the parks with laughter echoing past the picnic tables. Neighbors not only knew each other's names, but their pets and birthdays as well. Block parties were commonplace. During the 4th of July, whole streets would glow with the shimmer of fireworks and shared joy. In every way, Evergreen prided itself on decency, mutual support, and the belief that violence was something that happened elsewhere, far from the tranquil western edge of Washington. Against this idyllic backdrop, the events that unfolded on October 16th would eventually seem unthinkable, a breach in the town's protective cocoon. Yet in that moment, as the sun arched high over the quiet streets and the distant laughter of children melded with the calls of circling gulls, no one in Evergreen could have anticipated that anything could shake the town's sanctuary of safety and trust. Sanders family. The Sanders family had all the surface traits of an archetypal American household, one that seemed to blend seamlessly into the fabric of Evergreen's idyllic, tight-knit community. Charles Sanders, age 53, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt-and-pepper hair, and a reserve in his eyes that often mirrored the seriousness with which he approached both life and work. Linda Sanders, his wife, was 42, energetic and quick to smile, a woman whose resourcefulness and warmth had always been the quiet engine driving the stability of the family. Their children, Lisa and Brian, gave the house its heartbeat. Lisa was the eldest, 20 years old and balancing college classes with a part-time job at the local bookstore. She had inherited her mother's ready compassion and her father's steely resolve, 2 qualities that sometimes conflicted but more often made her a poised mediator in the household's disputes. Brian, the 11-year-old youngest, was sprightly and endlessly curious, his enthusiasm for video games and baseball only rivaled by the fondness he held for family movie nights and weekends at the park. After relocating to Evergreen 4 years prior, the Sanders had embraced their new surroundings with both gratitude and open arms. Their single-story home, shaded by towering Douglas firs, often played host to neighborhood gatherings. Saturday barbecues where Charles manned the grill and Linda organized scavenger hunts for the neighborhood kids. For all outward appearances, there was a contented sense of routine. Charles commuted to his job in Olympia, Linda volunteered at the town's community center, and the kids excelled in their classes and activities. Yet, as in many families, cracks below the surface began to appear with the passage of time. The closeness that once had rooted them now brought friction. Differing dreams and growing disappointments colored their daily lives with strain. By the summer of 2022, these strains had evolved into conflicts too prolonged and deep-seated to ignore. Still, the Sanders strove to maintain the image of harmony, quiet dinners, shared holidays, the annual family camping trip, partly out of habit and partly out of the sincerest hope that routine could still revive what had slowly begun to fracture from within. Despite the mounting tension in their marriage, both Charles and Linda placed their children's well-being above all else, endeavoring to shield them from the full force of adult troubles. Family nights persisted, and love was not in short supply, even if it looked and felt different than before. To neighbors and friends, the Sanders remained a beloved and respected fixture of the Evergreen community, one whose eventual crisis would stun everyone precisely because they had seemed so ordinary and, in their own way, blessed. Family storm. By the summer of 2022, the Sanders household was caught in a storm no one outside their home could have predicted. Beneath the veneer of neighborhood barbecues, community volunteering, and family movie nights was a well of emotional tension built up over years of quiet disappointments and unresolved feuds. When Linda filed for divorce, it wasn't so much an eruption as it was a slow-motion landslide, incremental steps that finally gave way under accumulating weight. The decision to separate, though inevitable, sent shockwaves through every aspect of their lives. Charles moved out, a duffel bag of clothes in tow, while Linda maintained routines for Lisa and Brian as best as she could. Breakfast pancakes, packed school lunches, gentle reminders to do their homework before watching TV. The house itself wore the change, the silence after dinner, the missing shoes by the door, even the echo of Charles's laughter in the halls that now seemed impossibly distant. On weekends, Charles would stop by to see his children or to grab a fresh set of shirts. Sometimes these exchanges were cordial enough, a matter of habit and shared affection for the kids. But when Charles and Linda spoke privately, their conversations quickly became battlegrounds, old resentments resurfacing over division of property, child custody logistics, and finances. Their marital home, once the center of family harmony, became a war zone marked by polite passivity on the surface, and underneath, the constant hum of stress. Months of counseling and negotiations proved fruitless. Each session, initially hopeful, dissolved into circular arguments where neither Charles nor Linda could find common ground. For Lisa, the eldest, the split was especially jarring, balancing college exams with the burden of choosing sides, comforting her little brother while battling her own uncertainty. Brian, still in elementary school, withdrew into video games, clinging to the remnants of routine as his family's foundation shifted underfoot. Events came to a head that fateful autumn day. Linda and the kids, returning from Sunday church, noticed Charles's pickup truck parked in their driveway. It wasn't unusual for him to drop by and do laundry or collect paperwork. Yet, tension immediately thickened the air the moment they crossed paths inside. The sight of suitcases, the cold nods of acknowledgement, the discreet glances between mother and daughter. In the kitchen, Charles and Linda began another round of tense negotiations. Their voices were hushed at first, careful not to alarm Lisa and Brian. But as topics turned to child support, visitation, and accusations of broken promises, decades of frustration poured forth. Charles's tone sharpened, Linda's patience snapped, and their private battle spilled over, igniting a confrontation that, until then, both had managed to keep beneath the surface. Linda insisted that Charles respect the new boundaries. This was no longer his home. Charles, meanwhile, refused to leave and bristled at the suggestion he owed Linda more than the bare minimum. Anger flashed and subsided by turn, but neither would yield. For a brief moment it seemed that the worst would pass, with Linda heading upstairs to change out of her church clothes and Charles sinking into a chair to stew in silence. The energy in the home, a space once filled with laughter, became heavy with accusations unspoken, wounds unaddressed, and the dread that something irreversible was about to happen. It was a storm with no clear end, blowing through each room of the Sanders house, upending trust and routine, scattering old photographs, love letters, and the fragile hopes of reconciliation like leaves in the wind. No one who knew the Sanders family could have imagined the extent of this private chaos. The town saw only what was visible, a family in transition. Inside those four walls, however, something much darker and more destructive was quietly brewing, setting the stage for the unimaginable events that were about to unfold. Tension peaks. The argument between Charles and Linda Sanders had been brewing for months, every interaction thick with resentment, frustration, and fatigue. On that shadowed afternoon, the tension that had smoldered quietly within the Sanders household finally erupted in a way neither would ever forget. It started, as such fights often do, with hushed voices over paperwork sprawled across the kitchen table, documents detailing divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, and a spreadsheet of finances as cold and impersonal as the tone in the room. Each item up for negotiation reignited old grievances. Charles, embittered by the thought of financial loss and troubled by his own fading authority in the household, dug in his heels over every point. He questioned every figure, scowled over the child support figures that felt less like justice and more like punishment. Linda, worn down by months of instability, matched his rigidness with her own persistency. She insisted on fair division, on security for the children, on some slice of dignity for herself after years of compromise. As voices rose, the air crackled with accusations and defensiveness. Charles, flushed with anger, raised his voice and pounded the table to punctuate his points, while Linda, her patience at its limit, refused to be cowed, meeting his outbursts with a steely, weary calm. The children, Lisa and Brian, lingered at the edge of the confrontation, pretending not to hear but feeling every tremor. Their daughter Lisa stole anxious glances between her parents, her university textbooks abandoned on the stairs. Brian sat on the living room floor, headphones jammed to his ears, but the angry cadence seeped through the walls. At one flashpoint, Charles stubbornly declared he would pay only the absolute legal minimum support, rejecting Linda's pleas for something more equitable. Linda, trembling with equal parts fear and adrenaline, begged him to respect her wishes and simply leave her home. The tension, which once churned beneath the surface, now spiked into the open. Every sentence carried the weight of years spent denying problems, wishing for normalcy. Every word stung with the finality of lives coming irretrievably apart. Exhausted, Linda eventually turned away, seeking a moment's respite upstairs, away from Charles's glare and raised voice. But the emotional storm continued to rage in the air she left behind. In those moments the household felt less like a home, and more like a fault line ready to split wide open. The sense of impending doom hovered with every step, every heartbeat, as both Charles and Linda sensed, deep within, that something was about to shatter. Nightmare on the upper floor. Charles's footsteps echoed ominously on the carpeted landing, each step heavy with a predatory intent that shattered the domestic silence. The upstairs hallway, once a passage for bedtime stories and the quiet shuffle of slippers, was now a gauntlet of dread, as Linda, sensing his presence close behind, felt every hair on her neck stand up. Gone was the familiar homey warmth. In its place, a chilling draft seemed to snake beneath the door as she fled into the master bedroom. Charles moved quickly, his hands shaking not with regret, but with the cold certainty of someone who had crossed an unthinkable threshold. Before Linda could even finish dialing her daughter's number or call for help, Charles lunged, wrestling her to the ground with an aggression that brooked no hesitation. He clamped one broad palm across her mouth to stifle her screams, muffling desperate pleas into strangled sobs that no one else in the house could have heard. The room filled with the frantic scrabble of limbs and Linda's wild heartbeat pounding in her own ears. He produced a roll of duct tape, tearing off strips with a mechanical precision that made the violence somehow even more terrifying. He forced her wrists together, wrapping tape so tightly her fingers tingled and the circulation fled her hands. More tape sealed her mouth against speech and blindfolded her eyes, plunging her into a world of darkness, her own home suddenly as alien and dangerous as any stranger's lair. Linda's thoughts raced chaotically, images of her children downstairs, the clock ticking uselessly in the next room, the sudden and absolute loss of power over her fate. Powerless, she lay on the bedroom carpet, the fibers pressing sharply against her cheek, her mind a vortex of horror, disbelief, and primal survival instinct. Charles hovered, breathing ragged and uneven, surveying his terrified captive as if awaiting some perverse absolution from the silence. Only after binding her completely did he leave the room, slamming the door with a finality that reverberated through Linda's body. The sound of his footsteps retreating was, in those moments, somehow more chilling than his presence. Alone, bound, and blindfolded, Linda became acutely attuned to every creak, every distant thud, each amplifying her terror that he might return, or worse, that he might not, leaving her abandoned in her own personal nightmare. Press emergency button. In the midst of terror and confusion, Linda's survival instincts flickered valiantly, restrained, with the sticky ache of duct tape still scoring her wrists, and the cold panic tightening around her chest. Her mind tore through every scenario, searching for a sliver of hope. Though her vision was darkened by the blindfold and her lips sealed with tape, she remembered one crucial detail, a gesture of foresight in her otherwise routine life. Clasped to her left wrist was her Apple Watch, a token of modern convenience that now stood as her last hope. Her heart hammering, Linda forced herself to move, straining her bound arms against the biting adhesive. Inch by inch, with a mixture of desperation and determination, she twisted her wrist, maneuvering the digital crown of the watch with the edge of her finger. Each movement sent electricity through her nerves, but giving up was not an option. With one final concerted effort, Linda managed to trigger the SOS function. The haptic feedback of the emergency feature pulsed against her skin, a muted confirmation that, somewhere beyond her private horror, a call for help was being sent out into the world. Unable to speak, she nonetheless struggled to make her distress known. She grunted, whimpered, and tried to create as much noise as possible, directing her sounds at the microphone of the watch. At the same time, pulses of emergency texts raced toward her daughter and a trusted friend, the automated messages relaying her location and dire need. The seconds that ticked by were both agonizingly slow and blindingly fast. Linda oscillated between fear and fierce hope, praying that even on the other end of incoherent noises, someone would sense the seriousness of her predicament. Even in the suffocating darkness, Linda's mind wove through uncertainty, senses hyper-attuned to every subtle shift in her environment. The faint buzz of her watch became a beacon, a fragile thread connecting her to the outside world and perhaps to salvation. As the seconds dragged on, she became utterly focused on keeping the line open, consciously making more noise whenever she sensed movement or proximity, worried that any lapse would consign her plight to oblivion. Simultaneously, the automated message system also pinged her emergency contacts. To her daughter Lisa, the alert must have arrived like a bolt from the blue, an abrupt, chilling interruption to a mundane day. For Linda, this possibility of being located, this digital breadcrumb left in the abyss, was all she could cling to. She did not know if help would come in minutes or hours, or if, even now, her abuser was plotting his next move. The only certainty was that she would not let terror silence her completely. When outside footsteps thundered down the hallway and the door handle rattled, a fresh wave of panic surged. Yet Linda continued straining against her bonds, refusing to be passive. Despite the darkness and bind, she pressed her arm tighter against her body to keep the crucial device from being yanked away. Each rasp, muffled cry, and thrum from the watch was an act of defiance, a coded signal through layers of tape and fear, urging the world to respond before it was too late. Police intervene. The moment the emergency dispatch center received the cryptic, muffled 911 call, the gears of law enforcement in Evergreen spun into high alert. Within minutes, a patrol unit was rerouted, racing with sirens off through the winding streets and under the shifting canopy of Washington's ancient firs. What awaited them was anything but the routine domestic dispute officers in this quiet town were used to handling. On arrival, the scene at the Sanders home was chaos barely contained. The front door was ajar, a doormat knocked askew, a subtle sign that something sinister had breached the boundaries of normal suburbia. Detectives, rigid with urgency, fanned out quickly, assessing the setting for immediate threats. The lingering hum of an active Apple Watch, still desperately trying to maintain a 911 connection, provided chilling evidence of Linda's final act of agency before being overpowered. Officers located the device, battered and nearly unrecognizable, hinting at the violence that had unfurled just moments prior. The house itself was in disarray, papers scattered across the kitchen table, shattered glass near the stairwell, and scuff marks tracking up the hallway carpet. Experienced patrol officer Mason Lee knelt by the living room window, radioing updates to dispatch, while his partner, Detective Janice Howell, began interviewing neighbors. From the house across the street, a neighbor revealed security camera footage showing Charles Sanders forcibly dragging a woman resembling Linda down the front steps and toward a dark-colored pickup truck. This single piece of evidence provided a vital timeline and shattered any doubt that Linda had left of her own accord. It was a race against time. Meanwhile, forensic officers moved swiftly to catalog every scrap of evidence, hair strands, partial fingerprints, and the torn remnants of gray duct tape. In the upstairs master bedroom, the scene told a harrowing story in silence. Deep carpet indentations, a bed rumpled as if clawed at in panic, and smears of blood on the doorframe. Each detail added urgency, serving as a cruel reminder of how quickly an ordinary home could transform into the epicenter of unthinkable trauma. Evergreen's police chief, informed within the hour, authorized coordination with the county sheriff and activated a regional Amber Alert. The immediate area was locked down, roadblocks set up along every major exit route. Officers canvassed parking lots, gas stations, and wooded back roads for signs of the Sanders family's battered truck. Back at headquarters, the Situation Room became a hive of frantic activity. Maps of the region lit up on digital screens as detectives plotted probable escape routes based on Charles's known habits and the location of nearby forests. The Technical Crime Unit coordinated with cell service providers, using every available resource to triangulate the latest ping from Linda's devices. As information poured in from the scene, officers matched tire tracks in the driveway with those of the missing truck and circulated surveillance stills from the neighbor's camera across state patrol networks. Within moments, Linda's daughter Lisa arrived at the scene, having received a chilling SOS alert that had set her world tumbling. An officer sat her down gently and explained the situation as delicately as possible, careful not to provoke further distress but needing every scrap of information Lisa could offer about her father's mental state and potential destinations. Each response she gave, from her father's favorite hiking spots to his extended family's rural properties, became another thread in the tapestry of search efforts. While some officers remained focused on the Sanders home for any new evidence or return of the suspect, others shifted their attention outward. The call went out to local media to spread awareness of the abduction and to alert citizens to report any sightings of the truck. Meanwhile, Charles's cell phone record was subpoenaed and traced, providing another breadcrumb that pointed toward a section of forest land 11 kilometers northwest of Evergreen, a remote region pockmarked with old logging trails and notorious for lost hikers. All available units sprang into coordinated action. K-9 teams trained for both search and rescue and the scent of fresh trauma moved to sweep the woods. Officers equipped for rugged terrain fanned out along overgrown paths, their radios alive with tense updates. The search was punctuated with surges of hope and frustration. Each snapped twig or distant call was followed by the gutting silence of another empty thicket. As midnight approached, a breakthrough. A sheriff's deputy at a nearby highway checkpoint spotted Charles's vehicle, torn and muddied, emerging from the darkness. A brief pursuit ended with Charles's capture, disheveled and wild-eyed, with scratches marking his arms. He offered no resistance, but what he would not reveal, the evidence would soon lay bare. Back at the search zone, Linda's own desperate resilience proved decisive. Staggering and bloodied, she was found at the doorstep of a farmhouse by a flabbergasted local. Paramedics arrived minutes later, and her immediate safety was secured, but the emotional wounds and devastating physical trauma would linger. Officers radioed her safe recovery back to the command center, where relief cracked the hardened mask of every investigator present. The case's swift response owed itself to not only modern technology, but to a law enforcement team that refused to let margins of doubt or bureaucracy dull their sense of urgency. In the early hours of the following day, detectives set about piecing together physical and digital evidence. Charles Sanders was charged with multiple felony offenses, kidnapping, battery, attempted murder, and remained in custody, awaiting arraignment. His shocking descent, recorded in detail by his actions and now pored over by crime analysts, stunned the Evergreen community. The incident reverberated far beyond the Sanders family itself. For Evergreen's police, this ordeal became a case study in relentless pursuit and close collaboration, a testament to the importance of readiness in even the most unlikely of small towns. In those crucial hours, the thin blue line that separated safety from chaos held firm, not by luck, but by training, compassion, and an unwavering refusal to give up on a single, silent plea for help. The terrifying prison break. Linda's ordeal in the forest represented a battle between life and death, each second stretching out with excruciating clarity as she confronted the darkest side of human desperation. After being driven from the sanctuary of her home, she was at the mercy of Charles, her former partner now transformed into something far more sinister. The truck's interior was suffocatingly silent on the ride. Every bump and turn magnified the terror in Linda's mind. Rain spattered the windshield as they turned off the main road, traveling down a deserted stretch that wound deep into the heart of the forest. Charles's grip on the wheel was so tight his knuckles whitened, and Linda, bound and gagged, felt every nerve in her body vibrate with dread. When the vehicle finally lurched to a halt, Linda's ordeal truly began. Charles dragged her from the cab with brute force, ignoring her muffled protests and wild, desperate attempts to resist. The scent of moss and wet earth filled her nostrils as branches whipped at her face and cold mud oozed beneath her shoes. It was there, in a remote clearing beneath the shadow of towering fir trees, that her nightmare descended into the unimaginable. Charles, acting with chilling efficiency, forced Linda into a shallow grave he had prepared in advance, his eyes devoid of remorse or hesitation. The earth was damp and heavy around her as he placed her battered body into the pit, piling dirt atop her and pressing a log across the surface to pin her down. Linda's mind reeled between disbelief, horror, and the elemental will to live. The darkness was all-encompassing, pressing in on every side as suffocation threatened with every shallow breath. In those moments the world became nothing but the weight of the earth, the musty air, and the distant sound of her own panicked heartbeat. Charles's footsteps faded, replaced by the relentless patter of rain, a grim soundtrack to her struggle for survival. Every instinct screamed at her not to surrender. With her arms still partially bound, Linda began the agonizing, painstaking work of shifting the log, scraping mud aside with the numb fingers she could still flex. Each movement sent lightning through her bruised limbs. She inched upward, mouth dry and caked with soil. Oxygen came in ragged, precious bursts. Twigs scratched her arms as she finally broke the surface, gasping at the shock of cold night air. The forest loomed with spectral shapes, offering both cover and menace. Bleeding, dazed, and nearly spent, Linda forced her battered body onward, crawling out of the pit on pure adrenaline. Her memory splintered into flashes, branches tearing at exposed skin, shoes slipping in silt, the clamber over roots in darkness, her muffled cries blending with the wind. Any sense of time was lost as Linda staggered blindly through the dense woods. Panic warred with determination as every shadow became a threat, every rustling leaf a potential pursuer, but she held fiercely to a single thread of hope: survival for herself and her children. The forest seemed endless. Linda's breaths fogged in the chilly night, and her wounds pulsed in rhythmic agony with each faltering step. Nevertheless, she pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to escape and a mother's desperate longing to see her family again. After what felt like years compressed into a single brutal hour, Linda saw the faint outline of a distant farmhouse. Hope flared. She summoned the last of her dwindling strength, weaving through a stand of brambles until she finally stumbled into the yard. Her appearance, mud-caked, bloodied, eyes wild with fear, stunned the homeowner into stunned silence. Yet their shock was quickly replaced by urgent compassion. They pulled Linda inside, wrapped her trembling form in warm blankets, and immediately called emergency services. Warmth and safety felt almost surreal as Linda collapsed onto the kitchen floor of her rescuer's home, her body trembling uncontrollably. As police and paramedics arrived, she remained in a haze, clutching at the small details: a kind word, a cup of water, the sound of sirens heralding an end to terror. When the officers gently questioned her, Linda fought through shock to provide them with what she could. She described the ordeal, the truck, the grave, and the way she'd clawed herself back to life with nothing but sheer faith and the need to survive. Only then did the gravity of what she'd endured settle around her, mingling with a fragile sense of victory. The escape left an indelible mark. Each scar and bruise a testament to her endurance and refusal to become a victim of the darkness. The forest once seemed a place of death, but through Linda's struggle it also became the unlikely site of her rebirth. A horrifying ordeal, yes, but one that would eventually become a story of courage, survival, and the stubborn refusal of hope to die. A shocking case and its consequences. The Sanders case sent shockwaves through Evergreen and far beyond, echoing in the hearts of residents, police officers, and anyone who heard the chilling details. In the aftermath of Linda's miraculous escape and Charles's arrest, the town found itself grappling with the disturbing reality that even the most picturesque communities are not immune to violence lurking just beneath the surface. Charles's indictment was swift and severe, a reflection of the gravity of his crimes. He faced charges of aggravated kidnapping, attempted murder, felony domestic battery, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom drama soon attracted regional media attention, with journalists descending on Evergreen to cover every development. News crews staked out the courthouse, and true crime podcasts dissected every available detail with a morbid fascination. Within days, the Sanders family's private tragedy was being relived in living rooms and over kitchen tables across Washington state. Linda's physical injuries healed under the care of doctors and the immediate support of her children, but the invisible wounds would linger far longer. She struggled with post-traumatic stress, haunted by flashbacks of her captivity, and plagued by survivor's guilt. Nightmares and panic attacks became a constant shadow. She found herself navigating a maze of therapy sessions, legal consultations, and unending questions from authorities, reporters, and even well-meaning friends wanting to help. The traumatic events cast a long shadow over both Lisa and Brian as well, as they coped with conflicting emotions of relief, anger, confusion, and an enduring distrust of the world's safety. Evergreen itself was transformed. The case triggered urgent town meetings, demands for greater awareness and better systems for protecting victims of domestic violence. Local police partnered with advocacy groups in new educational campaigns about the warning signs of abuse and how to access intervention services. Churches, schools, and neighborhood organizations established protocols to check on at-risk members of the community more proactively. Elsewhere, experts pointed out the pivotal role played by technology, and by Linda's courage, in averting total tragedy. The Apple Watch's SOS feature became a topic of national discussion, sparking debates about the importance of wearable emergency tech, privacy concerns, and the need to train people in using such devices effectively. Law enforcement officials gave presentations on the Sanders case at state and national conferences, emphasizing the importance of rapid response, interagency cooperation, and the life-saving value of even the faintest calls for help. The scars from the Sanders case left a permanent mark on the psyche of Evergreen, fueling both trepidation and resolve. The case became a byword for the kind of horror that can bloom in silence, but also for the power of resilience and the community's commitment to change. Linda's eventual testimony in court, softly delivered but fiercely honest, galvanized both public opinion and legislative attention. With each retelling of her ordeal, Evergreen residents reaffirmed their promise, never again to ignore the unseen dangers brewing behind closed doors, and never to underestimate the courage it takes to fight for one's life against impossible odds.